Oppenheimer is directed by Christopher Nolan and stars Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Robert Downey Jr., Florence Pugh, and among others. And this is based on the true life story about J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was a theoretical physicist who developed pretty much nuclear weapons as part of the Manhattan Project. And it deals with him getting together the team involved with it in order to create the nuke. And on top of that, it deals with the after effects of what happens after the testing goes down. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, this movie was directed by Christopher Nolan, who, what can I say, I've been an avid fan of for many years. If you've been following my channel, I've reviewed all of the films that he's directed at this point. Some of the reviews you can actually find on the website at filmfreaks.com, which I did some written reviews on, including with his first film that he did, Following, Memento, and among others. And I just really got interested with this film because after hearing about what Nolan's next movie was going to be about, with telling this true life story about the creation of the nuclear weapons and stuff as the first atomic bomb, it got me not only interested on the premise alone, on the real life guy that was involved with it, but also the cast when this was like completely stacked. And Christopher Nolan, he likes to use a lot of A-list stars, and I couldn't be more excited for this movie. And on top of that, it just seeing the premise behind it got me interested, because this is definitely an interesting story about the kind of risk that involves with a man who was trying to essentially, create something that he thought was going to be used for the greater good. And it deals with not only the build up to where it leads into that, but also the effects that it has with him as a person, because knowing the risks involved, it's like he's really concerned afterwards about what it takes with everything, especially, well, if you know your history, eventually it ends up pretty much using to send the nuclear weapons to Japan during World War II as a way of ending World War II. And so, after upon seeing this film, I can honestly say that I was blown away completely. Like, this movie was everything that I really wanted to see out of a biographical film, but for a 3-hour film that's very dialogue driven, I still couldn't get enough of it, because it definitely kept me going, and it makes a really good comparison with JFK from the 90s, in that kind of where it's very dialogue driven, but there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening, a lot of twists and turns, and some other stuff that's involved with it that, in typical Nolan fashion, I kept myself really interested, especially when it gets to the third half and into the last act of the film. And to get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this were all phenomenal. Everyone brings their A game to a T. Cillian Murphy, I've always enjoyed as an actor, and I've seen him in a lot of great stuff that I really loved him in, including the 28 Days Later, the Dark Knight trilogy, and a lot of the other films that he's involved with Christopher Nolan, and him being him finally getting to headline a Christopher Nolan film as the lead was not only captivating, with him being able to really show a lot of the performance with him just on his eyes alone, but also it helps that he actually kind of looks like the real life guy in real life, and just the way that you see this character study of him pretty much going through trying to teach people about the ways that the nukes work and stuff like that, and his smarts on how everything works out, and also trying to come up with the after effects of what it takes on it. It really is a haunting performance that's definitely probably going to go down as might be actually my favorite performance of Murphy's. Because as much as I love him in a lot of his other films, I can say that this is definitely going to probably be my personal favorite, at least on a very dramatic level. Like, he really does it so well in this film, I couldn't get enough. And a lot of the not going to go into detail, but the PTSD that it also deals with him was also a bright spot, because you can really see a lot of the emotions and a lot of the trauma that's involved with him as he starts to realize that doing what he's doing has some risk that's involved with developing the nukes and everything. And then the rest of the cast are all phenomenal too. The biggest standouts for me the most were definitely Robert Downey Jr. I'm glad to finally see him make a comeback after that piece of shit that he did called Doolittle a few years ago. So I'm glad that he's going back to other stuff outside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And while I enjoy him as Iron Man in a lot of the other films that he was in, he was definitely one of the biggest highlights of this film, where he was able to really get involved with a real life guy that is kind of, you're not really too sure about how the movie's playing out with his character. And I'm not going to go into spoilers or anything, but I appreciate that you're seeing him on his his like perspective in a lot of things as the movie unfolds, because throughout most of the film there are a lot of scenes where his character is taking place in the black and white scenes that Nolan uses, and you see his side of it at these kind of committees and these hearings that they're doing and stuff, talking about Oppenheimer, and there's a lot of mystery to his character that I find myself very fascinated with. And so Robert Downey Jr. really knocked it at the park, and he definitely has one of the biggest breakout scenes at the very end of it. That I don't want to go into detail, but he really puts all of his emotion together and everything. And then the rest of the cast, I was really surprised to see a lot of famous faces that show up. That I'm not going to go into spoilers, but if you've seen from like some of the trailers and some of the like kind of press casting that they had involved. It's great seeing familiar faces like Emily Blunt. She really carries her own. I've always liked her in other films, especially with Edge of Tomorrow, and so many other works. And here she really she does kind of like take kind of a backseat throughout parts of the film where she's not really given too much focus, but she does have some really good moments, especially the scene at the end when she gives a speech about Robert and everything, and really she holds her ground really well with it. And then, it's also great seeing Florence Pugh, even though, like I said, she's not really in a whole lot, but when she is on screen, she's always top-notch, and I'm really glad to see that she's really becoming a great and tremendous actress and showing up in various projects, and I can't get enough of her. And then, seeing other A-list stars that come up here and there, it's just so much of a who's going to show up next kind of movie, because I go into movies, and after about, like, every 30 minutes to an hour, there's always, like, another A-lister that shows up and stuff, like, seeing Josh Hartnett, or like, seeing other ones that I didn't expect to see, like, what's his name, Benny Safdie, I think, I believe it was, the guy that was from a Good Time from a few years ago with Robert Pattinson. He shows up, and then you also have, just a whole lot of other cast members I want to give away, because there's just so many of them that show up, that in unexpected appearances too, that I didn't even know about going into it and everything. So that was. The cast in this are just all tremendous. And then one of the other things I love about the story in this is the way that, it tries to showcase a lot of like different viewpoints, where you have Robert's perspective, where it's mostly taking place in color, and then you have Robert Downey Jr.'s character that's all going into the black and white scenes that's basically showing his perspective. And the way that Nolan was able to incorporate stuff that deals with the whole black and white, makes a good double feature also with Memento, but the difference in that is that the sequences that were in Memento were basically played backwards, while in this one it's basically switching perspectives on it, while also having scenes that kind of do repeat themselves at times to kind of basically be similar to Memento. He likes to try to make them like tie into each other toward the end of it. So I thought that was a nice way of looking at it with something like this with Memento on that level. And then the other thing, too, on a visual standpoint, like, this movie gets crazy, especially with some scenes that involve with not only when the nukes go off and stuff. It was really fascinating to see in IMAX, because seeing that on the biggest screen possible, you really showcase a lot of what they can do with practical effects and stuff, because that's not all CGI. Or there's not really no CGI in this film at all, and seeing all practicals with the explosions go off and everything, it just showcases how much that of a old school kind of filmmaker that Nolan is. And I'm glad that he is still one of the last directors in Hollywood that likes to stick with practical effects. And one of the other biggest things too is definitely the score in this. This is the same. I forgot the name of the guy. It's Ludwig or something like that. I'm sorry if I can't get his name, but he was the one that also composed Tenet, and I thought he really did a tremendous job in this. Pretty much filling in for Hans Zimmer, because Hans Zimmer was also doing Dune Part 2. Because in Tenet, Hans Zimmer was also doing Dune Part 1. So this is the second time that I think that they wanted to get Hans Zimmer, but because he was working on both the Dune films, they couldn't get him. And, he does just a really great epic score in this. The composer that did this, and it really does give a good vibe of that kind of really, like, haunting kind of feel at points, and just everything that you want to expect out of seeing a biographical film like this. And it gets me on the edge at points. If I have to get into any kind of cons, I would say is that there are characters that come here and there that don't really get much development or kind of build up to kind of feel like they have ways of dealing with their relationship with J. Robert Oppenheimer. Because, for example, you have Emily Blunt's character that is there to basically provide kind of support for him, but also going through a lot of tough stuff with their marriage and everything. And it feels to me like there were some gaps they kind of had to really fill in, because there's a subplot that involves with them and their son, and everything, and I won't go into detail, but it just feels to me like there's stuff that they really could have added more with to really, get more of a payoff to it, to really earn the payoff that happens toward the end of the film with when it's resolved. And so, and then there's other characters that I feel like they could have either cut back to, they could have came back to, or could have really, maybe had some better resolution with, and all that. But in a more, but that never really bothered me too much, because knowing that these were all trying to present itself as, characters that were there present when J. Robert was trying to, achieve what he did. I could still buy that along the way that with how the story played out and everything. And while it could throw some, I know it can throw some people off the way it goes with a lot of it being very dialogue heavy and stuff, but I was never bored by it. And the pacing, at first, maybe the first maybe 10 or 15 minutes kind of really took me to kind of understand what it was doing at first. And that's kind of typical with a lot of Nolan films. But once it kept into gear, it kept me so invested that I never got bored with it. And so this is definitely one of the best films for me for the year. And with that, I'm going to give the film a phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. And so, for those of you who have also seen Oppenheimer, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.